Hi, I'm Mark Rossano, founder and CEO of C6 Capital Holdings, coming to you from Primary Vision Network. Today we're going to look at the economy. We're going to break it down into looking at the overall economy and some of those daily activity indicators, high frequency data points. Then we're going to break it down into the US, Europe, and Asia to really kind of go through what's happening in some of these specific locations. And really this point in time looking at not only production, but also imports, exports, to look at the global market as a whole and how things are going to evolve throughout the remainder of the year. So just jumping right in, here we can talk with you about some of the alternative data points that we continue to look at that Bloomberg has been really good at assembling. And here you can see just how everything continues to flatten out. You know, there's not much to really say regarding where things are going at this point, because you can kind of see everything is really flatlined. We've seen this stagnation that has continued to really resonate throughout the like every single one of these economies. Like right now, New York City restaurants, they're saying that they can have indoor dining at 25% capacity starting September 30th. So we keep getting some data points that should start to kind of push us a little bit higher, especially, but again, like we were talking offline, and one of our someone that we work with was talking about how, you know, school is already closed. Like, what's going to happen going forward? How are things going to adjust with school reopening, with the, you know, people trying to go back to work, getting back to some kind of normalcy? And we're seeing some of the headwinds that's being created with some of these reopenings and some of the resurgence. So it's really kind of a cautious reopening in terms of not only daily activity, but also when we see spending, jobs, and what's really happening across the board. Some of the big issues that we continue to see is not only just in the British exit, you know, Brexit coming back, and you know, now there's an even more concern about, is it going to be a clean break? Is it going to be a really an unhappy divorce, which is what we continue to see in the market starting to price in. We also have reported infections going up. Now, this is important, not because we're seeing this result in additional hospitalizations. We're not seeing the same type of fear, but we are seeing the same type of slowdown in terms of the consumer. The consumer is changing their spending patterns and avoiding some of these areas, because right now a lot of these individuals are asymptomatic. You have a lot of testing. We're trying to get in front of this, but it's also resulting in a spike as people start to normalize. Now, the UK is starting to tighten up a little bit to try to avoid some of these increases as they go through. But you can see that France and Spain continue to be that overhang, which is why we've seen some adjustment specifically in Spain. But again, it's more the consumer that is being impacted, because we're seeing additional shutdowns in terms of, you know, especially in the UK, some storefronts shutting down. But the consumer is just being more cautious. They're, you know, maybe I don't have to go to the store twice this week. I can go once, or I can go every other week to try to avoid some of these exposures, which again continues to hit home with some of the tourism. Now you can see that, now this is just looking beginning of August versus end of August. You can see that there was a big drop in some hotspots, or realistically a little bit of growth. And that's what we're starting to see. We're starting to see a little bit of normalcy on the airlines. We're starting to see a little bit more coming through. And this is something that we'll talk about on the US side tomorrow, when we look at the EIA and what's happening with the TSA data and what's happening with some flight departures, because we are starting to see a bit more of a pickup as we go through September. Now, this is something where we think we're going to see a little bit of a walk back, because, you know, again, we're not seeing the business traveler move around the same way. We're seeing people start to tighten up a little bit as they go to, as we start to see school come back. And it's just a matter of, well, what are people doing? How are things adjusting? So we've seen a little bit of an increase going into Asia Pacific, in the Middle East, but again, within Europe itself, it remains low, and then into some hotspots in the Mid-Atlantic, with a small decline in North America. So again, it's spits and starts, which is why we continue to kind of see that headwind as we go forward in terms of breaking that ceiling that we've seemed to have hit around that 80 to 85% of normalization rate. And that's when we start looking at aircraft departures, because even though we're starting to see a little bit of a normalcy in terms of those percentages, you have to put it into context, because right now we're seeing that there's still about 42% decline in U.S. domestic flights on a worldwide level, 45% decline versus 2019, and then U.S. international flights still down 74%. So you're still seeing a huge decline when we're looking at U.S. passengers. So the first chart was really looking at Europe. How is Europe moving about? And here we're shifting a little bit and looking at, okay, well, what is happening in the U.S.? How is the U.S. fared? And you can see that U.S. domestic flights have started to creep back. We saw the announcements in June that they were going to get some normalization in August. Some of that was rolled back, mostly cut in half. And now September, we saw a little bit of an increase, but again, measured increases to really see and understand, okay, well, where is the demand going? What is the consumer doing? And we still continue to see that slowdown in not only domestic flights and departures, but also those international flights. Just people want to stay near home, travel. So we've seen a little bit more driving, but again, we're not seeing the flights come back, which is something that's we believe is going to remain a problem as we go through the end of the year. And that's when we start to look at that and really kind of break out some of Europe. And you can see Europe's really starting to roll over, specifically Spain and France, because you're starting to see those COVID cases increase. And again, it's not so much that the government's forcing you to do anything. It's just the consumer is naturally adjusting to that fear index in terms of, okay, well, people don't want to be contagious. They want to be extra cautious. And that's why we continue to see these overhangs, especially as we start going into that flu and cold season where, what is a sniffle versus what is COVID? Eventually COVID will be when you have a bad case of the flu. And that's when you think about the evolution of a virus, if you kill the host, you are not going to propagate. You're not gonna see that specific virus continue to be contagious. Instead, you get something that's a little less severe, maybe more contagious, and that's going to be that kind of natural evolution. And that's why when we look at some of the vaccine updates, AstraZeneca delayed their new testing, and it was only because they wanted to collect the data of the first wave, do safety tests. They had there was one case of a spinal issue, so it was a matter of, okay, well, was there something wrong with that vial? Was there something wrong with that batch? Those are things that they want to do because it's easier to measure them when the vaccines are measured in thousands, not millions or billions. So this is something where naturally going through, doing that self-check, trying to do it right to make sure it's safe for consumption. But again, these are things that are going to weigh until we have a certain amount of safety or comfort. And that's when we start to look at, okay, well, the increase in cases. And that's where we look at India, where India continues to see that growth in cases as they try to normalize. But again, even though the lockdowns aren't happening in the same way or they're more localized, you're still getting the consumer adjusting the way they're moving about, which is why Brazil, US continue to see the same type of headwinds where we're just not getting through that kind of that ceiling that has been created in that normalcy. And looking at it a little bit differently and looking at it from the perspective of new cases versus daily activity, you can see, so just to give you some context, the outline circle is the countries in August 7th, and then the solid circles are from September 7th. So we're looking at it over the month, how have things changed? So when we look at the US, we can see that things have gotten a little bit better in terms of a little less cases, and we've started to see a little bit of a normalcy in terms of people getting more active. But again, active is relative in terms of where things are, which is, again, that 80% level. Some of the other places we're going to continue to see a little bit of a slowdown, specifically in France and Spain, where you've seen those cases increase, which is moved to the right. Now, they still remain about that 80 to 85% of that normalcy. But again, those are things that we think are going to kind of drift lower as there's that concern in terms of some of those cases in the UK, something very similar. So again, kind of sitting within that construct of that spending as COVID continues to be a headwind, which is why we just don't see that oil demand, that the movement that we keep hearing about in terms of that GDP growth, because we're just not seeing that normalization across the market. Now, shifting a little bit into the emerging markets, we continue to see same chart, same backdrop, but again, it's India seeing those huge increases in cases, which is why we continue to be cautious. India specifically on oil demand, which is something we're going to talk about in a little bit, in terms of, all right, what is happening with oil demand, what is happening with diesel demand, and you continue to see some of those slowdowns. Now, China has backed off. They continue to remain at zero or near zero. But you're seeing that walk back in terms of some of the economic activity, which is, again, something we're going to talk about because imports are down. Now, they import semi-finished goods, raw materials to export semi-finished products and finished products. So if you're getting these fall down in imports, not only is the consumer weak, but you're also importing less, which means that you're going to export less going forward. So there has to be some kind of marrying in terms of what's happening, which is why we continue to look at some of these entities. And this is something that we think is going to be a bigger headwind. Now, India and China remain the focus just because of their size, their growth. But again, we continue to see those headwinds, especially as we turn to trade. Now, this is looking at just all of volume of goods arriving at U.S. ports. And we see that, looking at the 4-week moving average, we continue to see that slowdown. Now, the slowdown is just because, the supply chain has caught up a little bit. We're starting to see some of that move through the system in terms of intermodal movements, which, again, we'll talk about tomorrow. But the new import demands, it's just not there. We're just not seeing that real movement, which, again, the U.S. is the largest consumer in the world. So if we're not importing, it means we're not buying from other people, which means their economies are going to slow. Those, especially the ones that rely the most on U.S. Imports, specifically out of China and Europe, we continue to see this slowdown, which is something that we're going to watch and we're going to look at on a piece-by-piece basis, really kind of honing in on Germany, South Korea, and China, just because of their importance to really kind of gauging what does the overall market look like, and then what does it mean in terms of their economic headwinds that they're going to face. And just rounding it out, we always have to talk about traffic. What does congestion look like? What is really happening? And when we talk, we're going to talk a little bit tomorrow about the MTA and how turnstiles are still really far down, but you're starting to see some normalization, specifically in the US, because if I'm not going to take public transit, well, I am going to drive because I do have to go to work, or I do have a meeting, or I do have more things that are in person versus, even a month ago. So that's why we are seeing a little bit of a normalcy. But the ones that we continue to be concerned about is, again, that, what's happening in Europe and what's happening in India. And you can see France has started to slow down again. We see Italy is starting to slow down again. We had a little bit of a pickup as we got into September, but then as we're starting to see a little bit more cases, this is going to hit some headwinds. And again, when we look at the total index, the G20 index overall, we've kind of flatlined around that 20 to 25% down. And that's going to remain the case, especially as we look through parts of Asia, where we're starting to see a little bit of a slowdown in terms of the driving movements, which is what we're going to talk about later in the show when we look at what is India gasoline demand, what is India diesel demand. Again, these are the headwinds, and the ones to watch right now are Italy, France, and India in terms of what's happening in terms of movements. And especially because, again, just looking at what's been happening on toll roads in Germany in its own right, we've seen those toll road miles come off, which again is just indicative of what's going to happen for future exports and future production, which will be later on in a different segment.